Welcome back to the Frontier Faith Podcast. I'm Mike.
And I'm Jeff.
And today we're going to be continuing through 1 Corinthians as we wrap out the book. And we're going to be looking at chapter 16. We're going to be answering a really important question of how to have right relationships within the kingdom everywhere. So, Jeff, we're going to be in chapter 16. I want you to read for us our first couple verses as a very familiar passage. I think we've heard almost routinely, sometimes during the Lord's Supper and on the separate and apart portion of it.
That's right.
So if you would, go ahead and read that, and then we'll dive right in.
Sure. Verse 1. Now concerning the collection of the saints, as I directed the churches of Galatia, so you also are to do. On the first day of every week, each of you is to put something aside and store it up, as he may prosper, so that there will be no collecting when I come. And when I arrive, I will send those whom you accredit by letter to carry your gift to Jerusalem. If it seems advisable that I should go also, they will accompany me.
So in this letter in Corinthians, Paul tackles some pretty hefty theological issues, some divisive issues, some tribal issues amongst the congregation. And chapter 16 is almost full of like logistics and comings and goings of people, and almost like a PS, don't forget about this or that.
Yeah.
But it's just as much scripture as the rest of the book or the rest of the letter. So we need to examine this, like what is relevant for us to learn from this today. And so this time of collection, there's a couple things that come to my mind. I'm curious, Jeff, for you, what are some things that stand out to you as this example of collection takes place?
Well, there's a couple ideas. First of all, as soon as I knew we were going into this chapter, it made me think of, so Romans ends pretty similar. Romans 16 has a list of names. And it reminded me of a book that I haven't been able to read yet, but the title I thought was gripping, and it really shows you the point of what this author is going to get to. Where he says, reading Romans backwards. And he encourages reading Romans 16 in order to understand the theology. Because you would get to by the time you get to chapter 16, you think, you're done. And similar with Paul, by the time you get to into 15, you think, you're done, right? You talked about the resurrection is a great climax, and now he's talking about money and bringing money to Jerusalem. It's like, well, what are you talking about? And other things as we get getting into this, but it's a reminder that Paul is not writing a theological book. He's writing a letter to people who live in a specific time in a specific place. And as he gets into this chapter, it's a reminder that it's the church. There is a congregation in Corinth, but the church is larger than Corinth.
That's right.
And that needs to be a reminder to them and a reminder to us that we're a part of something much bigger than ourselves, and that truth affects every part of our life, including our wallets, right? And so one of the things that stands out to me is that Paul has this plan to assist a need that's happening in Jerusalem. But if you trace the scope of Acts, it starts in Jerusalem, and then the gospel spreads to Judea, Samaria, to the ends of the earth. But Jerusalem was sort of like a home base for the church for a while. Even as Paul's mission into the Gentiles was building up momentum, the church in Jerusalem was much larger. They had more resources. And so now when this famine hits Jerusalem, I just wonder what it was like for the church in Jerusalem to receive funds and support from Gentile congregations. If you think about the early strife, as Peter himself is trying to have to figure out the implications of the gospel being for all, with Cornelius's house and the Gentiles being brought in, and not only, so it's one thing to say, yes, the gospel can be for them too, but it's another thing for them to say, actually, it's not only that we're a part of one church, but I need to receive.
Yeah, not only humbling to have Gentile dogs, contributing, but also the realization of there is now no separation, there's now no partiality, we're all now one, and seeing that come to fruition and getting to experience that, I'm sure there was a mixed bag of reactions, but also some good ones.
And if there's a need somewhere else, it's your need too.
Yeah.
Because you're one body.
Because they're one body. And that's the big point of this lesson and podcast, is recognizing how big that one body is and what's our responsibilities within it. And that 1 Corinthians is not just about proper doctrine and theological principles, but also to have the right example and idea of network
Mm-hmm.
and relationships with other Christians, and how those relationships extend so much further than just your local congregation, and how we are to have a certain kind of recognition for one another in the right way.
Mm-hmm.
So let's go ahead and go down now to verse 5 through 9.
Okay, I will visit you after passing through Macedonia, for I intend to pass through Macedonia, and perhaps I will stay with you or even spend the winter, so that you may help me on my journey wherever I go. For I do not want to see you now just in passing. I hope to spend some time with you if the Lord permits. But I will stay in Ephesus until Pentecost, for a wide door for effective work has opened to me, and there are many adversaries.
So the thing I see important here is seeing how I know it took some time in Paul's ministry, but that Paul has some people.
Mm-hmm.
I think that's an important thing about evaluating having right relationships
Right.
in the kingdom is that you have to have people to have relationships with. And
Mm-hmm.
so getting involved one way or another to have a people that when you travel, you're leaving some people behind and you're going to some people. Maybe you haven't met them yet, but you know that there's people there. So finding a people is one of the
Mm-hmm.
most fundamental parts of being a Christian is knowing that you've been added to the body and Christ has added other people to that body. And then you meet in the middle of Christ in that way, and you kind of have to have had put yourself out there for that to happen, and that there really shouldn't be any hermit Christians that are
Mm.
just disconnected from other people. And, one of the most practical and like, common wisdom things to do is if you're moving somewhere, look up if there's a church there,
Mm-hmm.
or ask friends if, is there somebody there, or finding mutual friends with somebody somewhere. Um, and so having a people, so like Paul does here, of being able to leave and go, is just sets the proper backdrop to then operate in. And
Yeah.
so he doesn't explain how to have that people in this chapter, but it's evident that because those people are there, he can then have these types of conversations. So it sets a good example of as you're trying to serve in life, how foundational it is to have this pool of relationships kind
Mm-hmm.
of kind of in play. Any
It,
thoughts on that?
yeah, it's interesting to think about the way travel has become in Paul's time so much more accessible under the Roman Empire with the Roman road system. I heard one person say the Roman road system was to them what the internet is to us, in the sense that the internet has shrunk the world. The Roman road system shrunk the world. I mean, you have access to Asia Minor now. You have access to these other places where you get, and all roads lead to Rome. And so you have access to places, and if you have access to places, you have access to people. Well, now, 2,000 years later, you think about the way we have the ability to travel. I mean, just yesterday I flew back from a conference in Arkansas, and I just spent a day on a couple planes, and now I'm back in Alaska. And just back up a couple hundred years ago, me traveling up here, I mean, we call that an expedition.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
And
I
so,
had a banana this morning in Alaska, and that always just blows my mind that
yeah,
we
you
can
have
have that.
bananas in Alaska. But the point is that travel is a lot more accessible and is now a very common practice. And we see that up here in Alaska. I mean, if you want to go anywhere, get on a plane. But even the amount of people, the way we're going to summertime, all the travel that takes place in Alaska. And I just think it's interesting because typically when we're traveling, say we're on vacation or going to have an experience, we're pretty self-sufficient, and the comfortable route is I'm gonna get myself a hotel room. Maybe I'll go to church on Sunday if it's convenient, if there's one nearby, if I don't have anything else going on. We might, but just to, in order to check the box. But it's interesting to me that Paul says, so that you can help me.
Mm-hmm.
And that's awkward. As I'm going to, you invite, it's sort of Jesus to Zacchaeus, come down for there. I'm coming to your house today.
Yeah, invite yourself over.
He invites himself over, but I mean, there's a reason for that. It's not because Paul's lazy. That part of what it means to be a part of a body is not only for me to give to the body, but learning how to receive from others. Because in that receiving and being hosted by another, they get to be Jesus to you, but you get to build a relationship that you would not have otherwise.
And I love his mindset here of like if the Lord permits.
Mm-hmm.
And so as a Christian, we know our destination. He has a
Mm-hmm.
place prepared for us. We're going to be with him always. But we know our destination, but we don't quite know our journey.
Mm-hmm.
We don't know everything that's going to happen in between us and being with the Lord always.
Right.
But we do see this example of making sure that you go on this journey together,
Mm-hmm.
and that as you're going to and fro, as you're moving around, moving about, that you're going to other Christians, or that you're looking to connect to more, and your network and your extension of people should always be increasing
Mm-hmm.
as more people come into your life, as you come more into other people's lives, that you, as the years and decades go on, your connection to other Christians should ever be expanding. And then one of my favorite things, and maybe there's a better way to do this or say this, but one of my favorite things is in ministry, getting to feel like a spiritual, somewhat virtuous mob boss. Because someone will be like, "Hey, Mike, I got a problem. This thing's going on here with this," and I love being like, "Hang on, I know a
I
guy.
know a guy.
Let me call up Tony over here," and
I
he's,
know people who know people.
yeah, and my friend the doctor, the mechanic, or this person is the, whatever. I've lost count of how many times where just getting to connect someone to someone is, and the common denominator of that is Christ,
Mm-hmm.
and to live life together, not just for like theological inquiries, but for like practical purposes. Like, oh, you're moving there to go there for this person. Oh, you're passing through Albania. Oh, I know a family
I know a
there.
guy.
Let me give you some information.
Yeah.
And that only comes really through just organic, natural relationships. And it's
Mm-hmm.
not always easy. People are messy, and the church is full of people. But there's this dynamic being shown here of this large network of Christians. And that's something I see happening in Alaska more and more, and I think is also has been happening throughout the kingdom since its building. And it's encouraging to see the scope and the functionality of the kingdom,
Mm-hmm.
and it's just a thrill to serve in it. And we want to fan this flame of relationship and how we are to interact and travel and to send and receive people in a really godly way.
And I got an example and a question for you. The example is, I just said I was at a conference this week down in Harding, and but it was kind of a quick turnaround. So Sunday I preached here at the Valley, and then I was back home after our Bible class and all that. I was at home for maybe like an hour or two, go to the airport, fly all night, land at like 8:30 that morning, take an Uber to Searcy, and then I have like a few hours before the conference starts, and I'm just like dead exhausted. And I'm texting our friend Ron Smith there, and he's in Johannesburg right now,
Oh, nice.
and we're texting back and forth, and he's like, yeah, my wife's at work right now, but you remember the door code? And he just let me go up and sleep on his couch for like 4 or 5 hours, and then I take a shower, get dressed, and go to the conference. And I was like, this is so cool that this is even a possibility. That I just land somewhere. I don't live there, and he's in South Africa giving me the door code so that I could go sleep on his couch for a few hours. And I was just like, that's church. That's
Yeah,
church
the
right
amount of
there.
trust that comes
Yeah.
with walking with Jesus
Yeah.
is really, I think, unique.
Yeah. Question: do you think that they were encouraged and excited about his travel plans in Corinth when they've read this letter and
If there, as letters were to be done all in one sitting and read from this, I imagine that the reception was mixed, unfortunately,
Mhm.
because you had some factions that were like all about Paul,
Right.
and some that were not. So I'm sure at least a quarter of them were always like, "Woo!
Yeah.
Paul's coming here, let's go!"
Yeah, they'll set you straight.
Yeah, about time. Paul, does not approve of that type of
Exactly.
thing. So I'm sure that there was at least a large portion, if not all of them, were excited about it.
Well, I'm just imagining there's a subtle, we don't know this, but as far as like tone goes, like I'm just imagining like almost like a subtle threat, like mob boss sort of thing, where it's like you lay out all this. I mean, in Second Corinthians, he calls it like a hard letter, right? Where they grieved over this letter, this godly grief that was produced because of this. And he's like, he apologizes for the tone and for the harshness, but he also doesn't, I don't fully apologize because it produced this repentance in you. But I'm just imagining by the end of all this, where, I mean, we've talked about the sexual sin going on in our church, we've talked about marriages, we've talked about all sorts of stuff. He's like, yeah, I'm gonna come visit, and I might stay for the winter. Threat. I'm gonna check up on you. I don't know. I don't know his tone, but I'm just imagining. Oh, we have to figure this out.
I think it's kind of encouraging too, because he's not just willing to like send a nasty Facebook comment their way. He's willing to actually show up and live amongst them for a long time. I think that testifies to his sincerity.
Yeah.
Because just thinking of how many. So I was in Homer last week with and Anchor Point with some Christians down there, and without naming names, there was two ladies there that ended up having a miscommunication and had some tension between the two of them. And the husband of one of them said, "You guys are both friends. Come here." Pulled them together.
Oh, good.
You're gonna work this out.
Yes.
And they did. But it was hard for them, but they worked it out. I was just like I feel like Paul's kind of doing this on a very large scale of like, I'm just gonna be there.
Yeah.
And it's hard to gossip and fume and resent when the person's just sitting on your couch wanting to be there.
Yeah.
And so
it's like Paul and Philemon, right? One in one hand. Come on.
Get together.
Wow.
So I think it's a good thing.
Mm-hmm.
So we also see him talk about this idea of there's an open door, but also many adversaries.
Yeah.
I think that's important just to see in life that when you have a lot of opportunities in front of you, that doesn't mean it's always going to be smooth sailing.
Sure.
And just accept that there's going to be obstacles, hardships, and that might be because you're on the right path.
Mm-hmm.
And that Satan wants to really pacify us with comfort.
Yeah.
And I think that's what Jesus means by it's difficult for a rich man to enter the kingdom of heaven. And so the difficulties, don't take any old difficulty or adversary to what you're pursuing. If you're pursuing something out of faith, don't anticipate it to be bumpless in your path.
So how should one discern the difference between a door closing and an adversary in an open door? Which, I mean, we talked for a few weeks about discerning God's will, but I think just practically just trying to navigate decisions in life. Should I take this job or that? Should I move here or not? Like you said, like sometimes there's like, oh, there's a lot of obstacles in the way, a lot of adversaries. Oh, maybe that's not God's will. Well, maybe according to this, maybe it is. Maybe that's a sign that it is. But I wonder if, I mean, that can be kind of difficult too.
I think it is difficult, and I think requires a lot of wisdom and praying for wisdom. I think of Jesus calling Peter Satan, get behind me, Satan.
Yeah.
And he only calls him that because he's like, no, don't go die.
Mm-hmm.
And it's God's will for me to die. And so going back to things we've talked about before, of just having a firm grasp of what does God want? And that's what the opportunity is. If you're thinking, is it God's will for me to get this promotion? Like, I really want the promotion.
Mm-hmm.
And it's okay for you to recognize your own wants, but you got to be really careful not to project your wants onto God's wants.
Yeah.
And so first start with seeking first his kingdom and, his righteousness, all these things then get added and fall into place. So
that's key, because he talks about one of the doors for effective work.
Yep.
So it's a kingdom door.
Mm-hmm. Yep, not just a personal opportunity door.
Mm-hmm.
And his preference. Paul had preferences,
sure,
and he voices them, but you don't want to blur the line between your preferences and the will of God.
Yeah, yeah.
And adversaries are things that oppose God's will.
Mm-hmm. And so if they're thinking of, as far as through the kingdom lens, if there's effective work to be done for the kingdom, you can expect there to be adversaries.
Yeah. And if your life is totally comfortable all the time,
yeah,
that should maybe be a red flag for you.
Mm-hmm.
So let's continue now. Go ahead and read verses 10 and 11.
Okay. When Timothy comes, see that you put him at ease among you, for he is doing the work of the Lord as I am. So let no one despise him. Help him on his way in peace, that he may return to me, for I am expecting him with the brothers.
So, in a nutshell, what do we know about Timothy?
Timothy, the evangelist, we know that he was one who was raised by two godly women from Acts 16, and Paul sees his maturity and his faith, and so Timothy accompanies Paul on several of his journeys, is discipled by Paul, sent by Paul to go put things in order in Ephesus, and so we have two letters that were addressed from Paul to Timothy, First, Second Timothy. So he's doing the work of an evangelist. He's raising up and appointing um, and developing leaders and elders in the church in Ephesus, and deacons, and taking care of widows, and all sorts of things, doing the work of an evangelist there.
Excellent. And he's being sent to Corinth, which would have been an interesting dynamic to see take place. Because you're talking about Paul coming there, and then how would they feel about that? But now you have like Robin to Batman showing up to Corinth with Paul and Timothy, and
Younger than Paul.
And Paul's kind of chosen apprentice of sorts. And their church here is being told to some interesting things, to not despise him, to put him at ease. So, what do you think it means to put a preacher at ease, or to put a traveling evangelist at ease? What do you think that looks like?
Well, I think it does go hand in hand with not despising him. You said that phrase just made me think of when he talks to Timothy, let no one despise you, look down on you for your youthfulness, and set an example. Um, but I think the reason I mentioned that is that it rounds out that idea of putting someone at ease. That it's holistic. Maybe it's bigger than just making sure they get a good paycheck. But there's a relational ease that hospitality brings. Um, I've guest spoken in a lot of different places and traveled a lot of different churches, and there's times when congregations, I can tell they have gone over the top to put me at ease. And it doesn't mean this other congregation that supported my work there for whatever I was doing, doesn't mean they didn't love me or they weren't kind or weren't Christ-like. Not to put anything on their own character or anything like that, but you can tell when a congregation goes over the top to be welcoming and hospitable. And we've experienced that with our own travels up here. Many congregations up here are just amazing, over the top when it comes to, we're so glad you're here, we're thankful for you, and giving us a place to stay, making sure that we're taken care of. And it's liberating because it allows us to really be able to dive in relationally with the congregations there that we're visiting, not just for the few minutes that we get to preach or the few minutes we get to teach, but when when we're invited to eat, when we're having time here or there, you know what I mean? Like, there's being put at ease is liberating and makes ministry more effective in a variety of ways. Not muzzling an ox financially, but being put at ease allows us to have relational connections and to be able to be liberated. And I don't know if that makes sense, but
No, it does. It does. There's it makes me think of a proverb in Proverbs 23, 6 through 8, in that area, talks about don't eat the bread of a stingy host.
oh,
And thinking how,
I've had that before.
yeah, it's no fun.
Mm-hmm.
And you'll have to come over again sometime. And of how if Timothy's traveling through and he's on mission, he's trying to do something,
Right.
but he's staying there, and people are like, "Oh, great,
Mm-hmm.
yeah, whatever." Here's your like, it's hard enough to do certain things in ministry, but then putting extra tensions on him for as he's passing through makes it even that much more difficult.
Yeah.
And I think too, speaking to, in our culture here, when we have like televangelists, you have different historically, we've had some religious trauma of sorts with church leaders, and so we see guys in private jets and designer suits and like, give me your money so you can be spiritual, and so we're like, we're not gonna give you anything. And then we also kind of have like a pendulum swing all the way to the other side of like, oh, you must work in rags to work for the Lord. You must, just live by faith alone, and really penny pinch in providing for preachers. And so I find this to be a call for wisdom for learning how it doesn't tell you to doesn't give you a hard budget to set for traveling preachers, but it gives these ideas that are to be fulfilled of putting him at ease, not despising him, and helping with the work of the Lord.
Yeah.
In that you participate in the work of the Lord by receiving and sending out these preachers.
Yeah. I just looked at Proverbs 23, 6 and following. Do not eat the bread of a man who is stingy. Do not desire his delicacies, for he is like one who is inwardly calculating. Eat and drink, he says to you, but his heart is not with you.
Yeah. It's a horrible experience.
Keep going. Yeah. Sometimes when we've traveled, like I said, to visit different places and congregations, most of the time when we're driving back, I mean, what are we reflecting on? I mean, don't get me wrong. I enjoy your sermons and your classes and stuff. And sometimes we might reflect on the content of what was preached and teach and stuff, but and taught. But like most of the time, it's like we're reflecting on that time when we stayed up till 2 a.m. with our hosts and got to learn about their life, or we sat down, we went to coffee with this person, or we went to, or the over the top hospitality this person showed. And I mean, those
stick with you.
Yeah, because those are not side things. Those are kingdom moments.
And Christ can move mountains with mustard seeds of faith, and a gift of preaching is just as powerful as a gift of hospitality and giving and mercy. Yeah. And so there are many gifts that move mountains, right. And there's important movements to be had in the coming and going and working with church leaders. So speaking of church leaders, let's look at these next couple of verses. Go ahead and read just verse 12.
Okay. Now concerning our brother Apollos, I strongly urged him to visit you with the other brothers, but it was not at all his will to come now. He will come when he has the opportunity.
So this verse has been giving me a lot of pause for reflection, and it's been really challenging trying to really put myself in this situation, because what do we know about Apollos from Scripture?
Well, I think he's the one that's an eloquent speaker, right? And he's corrected by Priscilla and Aquila, and so strong faith and leadership, and was mentioned at the beginning of 1 Corinthians as some people really were following Apollos.
So he was a well-established, eloquent preacher. He was refuting the Jews by pointing out Christ. He was teachable. He's popular. But he wasn't, to our knowledge, he wasn't inspired like Paul or the prophets and stuff were. And so he was a first century epic preacher. Yeah. Right. So, Jeff, you guys just through a lot of prayer and open doors, you guys are going to be moving to Anchorage in the somewhat near future to work with the Anchorage Church of Christ, and that's something you feel called towards. And
many adversaries.
Many adversaries. I might be one of them. And imagine Paul is here on our podcast. Hello, Paul. We have one of the most epic guests we could have on here. And if Paul urged you and said, Jeff, I really think actually it'd be better for you to go to Albania with James.
I'm going to Albania.
Yes, sir. Can you
sign 1 Corinthians for me?
But can you imagine Can you imagine being like, Paul's urging you, not just like suggesting, I'm urging you, like, this has to be a good thing.
Yeah.
Urging you, and for you to be like, no,
Nah,
not
not feeling it.
not yet.
Mm-hmm.
So what has to be there for that to happen?
It can come from a variety of places. It can be a lot of pride, but also could be strong conviction um, or a knowledge that of God's will over Paul's will. Um, Being able to discern that just because one is a influential leader and has a lot of say and sway doesn't mean that he's right.
Does it seem like Paul respects Apollos' convictions?
Yeah, it seems like it. Right? He says, "There's not all his will to come now. He will come when he has the opportunity." I don't know if Apollos knows that. I don't know if he's going to come, but
When he has opportunity.
or if he's just conveying what Apollos said in response. He's going to come when he has the opportunity.
So I think this is like, in context of the whole letter, I think there's some really rich relational things we need to get from this as the church. One is, these are two guys that the church was divided about earlier.
Mm-hmm.
And Paul's like, you should go to Corinth, Apollos. Like, you should go. Timothy's going too.
Mm-hmm.
I want to go there too. We should all go to Corinth.
Settle it.
And so what the church was squabbling about, like real church leaders, like spiritual people, they want to be in the room together.
Mm-hmm.
Like they're okay with, they're not territorial per se. They have a spirit of unity together. One of the things I was told years ago that never sat right with me, and it bothers me to this day, was this idea that preachers are like cow patties,
Mm-hmm.
and that, you know, you put them all together, everyone all get a whole bunch of preachers together, things just really start to stink.
Mm-hmm.
But if you spread them out, it really fertilizes the ground and helps things grow.
Yeah.
Kind of a cheeky, funny idea, but just like, man, that just doesn't sit right with, if we're supposed to be able to, we're the meat eaters, the mature ones, and we can't get along, then I think that's grossly hypocritical at best.
Yeah, it's problematic.
Yes.
I'm going back to how did they receive this news that Paul was coming, and the people who follow Paul are like, let's go. The people who follow Paul is just like, oh,
The emotional roller coaster of Corinthians.
yeah, absolutely.
But I see here, though, an important principle, too, that church leaders won't always see eye to eye.
Mm-hmm.
And that's okay.
Yeah.
And I think that there's can be a tension in congregations when some people want to go there, some people want to do this or do that, and everyone's walking by faith, but not everything is exactly the same. And instead of thinking like they're not spiritual or they're rebellious, it shows the lack of hierarchy in the church, because you have an inspired apostle telling a preacher urging him where to go, and him respectfully declining, and Paul respectfully accepting.
Yeah.
And it's okay.
Yeah. And what they're not seeing eye to eye on is not whether Jesus was raised from the dead from the chapter before, to over travel plans and how to do effective ministry. And so I think part of what is embedded within this, because he said, if the Lord permits, earlier, a wide door of effective work is open for me. He's talking about his plans. The reality is that many times God has multiple doors open.
Right.
And so there's a recognition from Paul that yes, I am going to urge him to do this, but the Lord is really the one leading Apollos. And I think that's really important for leaders to recognize.
Yes.
When you're leading people, you want to use your influence. You don't lead out of your position, you lead out of your influence. You want to use your influence humbly, according to God's will, to help grow someone into the character and Christ likeness. But ultimately, the leader has to recognize that there's one ultimate leader, and that's God.
Mm-hmm.
Whether it be, shepherds or all under shepherds, recognizing that there's one good shepherd, one chief shepherd. And so, how does that shape even your own parenting? Where, I'm going to do everything I can to raise up my children in the Lord, but ultimately the Lord is leading them. And so, how does that change the way you pray? How does it change the way you guide? And obviously age matters, but anyway, just there's a lot of um, it's almost freedom that can come with the realization that the Lord is at work in every person's life.
And sometimes we just want someone to tell us what to do,
Yeah.
make the decision for us. But I think a lot, like you said, a lot of times God gives us a lot of doors all at once. And it's
Hmm.
kind of like, go play in the playground.
Right.
It's like, should I do the swings or the slide? Go play in the playground.
Yeah.
Like
Yeah.
you go choose, go pick. And I think it's important to know, like, you stepped through that door, that you weren't shoved through it or
Hmm.
dragged through it. Um,
Yeah.
and that you raised your hand and said, "Here am I, send me," that you
Yeah.
have that interaction with God, and that you're not pressured by your home or
Hmm.
locals or relatives or mentors, that as valuable as those relationships are, especially in a leadership role in the church, that these things are callings, not jobs,
Hmm.
and that you are answering that call and you're being respectful to other people who have different opinions. But I feel like opinions have just skyrocketed with the internet and
Oh
comment
yeah.
sections and armchair
Sure.
quarterbacks and
Yeah.
everything, and that is not absent in the kingdom.
Yeah.
And so people are going to have opinions about everything.
Hmm.
You want to respect people's opinions, but not be guided by people's opinions.
Yeah. So think about the ways leaders relate with one another. Something that they mention in verse 10 and 11, I'd be curious your thoughts on, is that when Paul is sending Timothy, who's not an apostle, he says that he's doing the work of the Lord as I am.
Yeah.
What do you think? What's the significant about that?
I think that that is important to show kind of the humility of Paul and also the elevation of the workers of God,
Hmm.
and how Timothy's not on some like pet project.
Yeah.
He's not like trying to get his Eagle Scout badge and doing some like
Yeah.
service project deal. He's
Leveling up,
he is
bolstering the resume.
yeah, yeah. Uh, and making sure that we see the body as an extension of Jesus,
Hmm.
not just a bunch of people trying to gain status or
Yeah.
reputation or something. And that it also pushes back against, once again, against hierarchy
Yeah.
in the church, and that that there is that there are these laborers, these fellow soldiers, um, and that the body has different roles and functions, but there is a kind of a least in these in the kingdom of God is greater than even John the Baptist, who's the
Hmm.
greatest man born of woman. And it's just in this kingdom there is in terms of value an equality with all.
Yeah.
Um, but it's really enforcing or validating Timothy's role, because you might see him as a young whippersnapper, or well, we don't get an apostle, we just get an apprentice.
Yeah.
You know,
Yeah.
we get the intern
Uh-huh.
instead of the real deal.
Wanting to listen to him.
Yeah, like I saw miracles with these other guys.
Yeah.
Like he's just here to teach,
Right.
boring,
Right.
and to push back against that of, you know, just thinking about what was more um, what should be more impacting, Jesus washing your feet or Jesus walking on water?
Hmm. Hmm.
Like this act of service is kind of how love is greater than these things. Like this action, this service is right here with this other acts of service. And I think it's to see the scope of ministry as not just level, but there's a certain equality in the works of God.
Yeah. One of the key leadership texts is Mark 10, when James and John makes a request, can we sit in your right and left? And he tells them that the Gentiles, when the way they look at leadership is they lord it over people. It should not be so among you. That the Son of Man came not to be served, but to serve, to give his life as a ransom for many. And like that's what leadership means, is to serve,
That's
right?
right.
But I think it's interesting in John 13, you mentioned washing feet, because you have two perspectives when you think about applying that text to your own life. One is, firstly, will I be like Jesus to pick up a basin and a towel and wash feet? Will I serve? And will I view, if you're leading in any capacity, my leadership through that lens of washing feet? But then there's also the perspective of Peter. Like, am I willing to allow someone else to serve me and to wash my feet? And that's sometimes can be even more challenging. Again, going to Paul, like, am I willing to let someone host me? But in leadership, it's like I heard someone just say recently, it's like we have so many leadership texts, but we don't, so many leadership books. I mean, you go on Amazon, type in leadership books, you'll find about 3 million. Not a whole lot on how to be a follower.
Mm-hmm.
And I think we need to learn how to be a follower, not just a follower of Jesus, but a follower of our own leaders.
I think
Yeah.
that's very pointedly what we have, like a little intermission in this, but then the next part is very much speaking to that of how to follow
Hmm.
in the church.
Yeah.
And so we're going to definitely
So
dig
not,
into that.
yeah, so not just a big name, big title, big apostle. That's Paul. I got to follow him. Um, but oh, yeah, I need to follow Timothy too. He's doing the same work.
That's right.
Yeah.
So this next verse here is almost kind of out of nowhere, and it's very, very meaty. And so go ahead and read verse 13.
Okay. Be watchful, stand firm in the faith, act like men, be strong.
And in verse 14.
Let all you do be done in love.
So let's just bite this down a little bit. So start with this first one of being watchful. What would you say it means to, as a Christian, to be watchful?
To be aware, to be sober minded. It's not just have, there's so many times where have you ever had those moments when like you've been like zoned out and then you actually been staring at someone and yeah, right now. Um, I've done that before where someone's like, "Why are you staring at me?" I'm like, "Actually, I was staring at nothing." Your eyes are kind of crossed, like glazed over.
The
It's
nothing
like,
box.
yeah, exactly. Like my eyes were seeing, but I was not being watchful.
Mm.
I was not. It wasn't. Nothing was being processed up here. My eyes weren't translating anything. I just think watchfulness is attentiveness. It's careful consideration. It's observing your surroundings. It's if you're going on a hike, you don't put your earbuds in, right? You got to make sure to have your senses operating in a way that can be aware of your surroundings.
You just saying that reminds me of something that happened last year. I think I told you the story where I was taking my trash out like 2 in the morning and had earbuds on and I have a long driveway and I was it was very, very dark. I didn't have a flashlight. I was carrying the trash out, rolling my trash can down, and then I saw this like shadow kind of moving around next to me. I was like, "What is going on?" And I had my earphones on quite loud. I turned my flashlight on my phone. There's this big German Shepherd snarling at me and been snapping and barking and running around me. He never bit me yet, but I was just clueless because I wasn't being watchful and was just pacified by my own comforts and
Hmm.
kind of speaking to what you were saying there. So
What
yeah, that's good.
it's what Jesus asked the disciples to do in the garden, to be
Mm,
watchful and to pray.
mm.
Yeah.
And then the next one here, to stand firm in the faith. What do you think it means to stand firm specifically in the faith?
Well, standing firm is just you know, not wavering. Think of Psalm 1, like a
Mm,
tree planted by the waters. That
mm,
standing firm is just sort of this being immovable. The just like I think of like a the palm tree, that's like the wind is just like absolutely, it's like almost to the ground, and once the wind stops, whoop, pop back up.
mm.
Yeah, so standing firm, but like there's your foundation is essential for that, So Sermon on the Mount, Jesus says the wise man builds his house on the rock, foolish man builds his house on the sand. It's the foundation that matters. Of course, the storm comes either way, and so the guarantee and the promise is that you'll make it through the storm if you build your house on the rock, which is his teaching. And so the faith, then the belief in the reality of Jesus's death and resurrection and ascension and kingship, like that is what's going to ground you and tether you to reality, come what may.
Yeah, so those are the truths that factor into all your decision making.
Hmm.
I think that's awesome. That's good. And then this next part here, which probably wasn't that big of an issue until like 5 minutes ago, it feels like, um, where it says "act like men,"
Hmm.
and it's a great, powerful verse, and there's a lot of images I want to like put on the screen right now of what I could say, like, what does it mean to act like a man?
Hmm.
Um, and I think of with this being a challenge to kind of grow up. It's
Hmm.
for the church here because it's not so much that men are more spiritual than women or something like that.
Mm-hmm.
But it's, you just look at the context of the letter, and there was kind of an attitude in here of, you're not my friend anymore,
Mm.
and I'm going to take my toys and go home, with the divisions amongst the congregation and stuff, and this challenge now of kind of like grow up. And also kind of reminds me of God's challenge to Job, with, as the King James would say, gird up your loins like a man,
Yeah, yeah.
and prepare yourself for serious thinking and action. And societally, men are the defenders, the providers, the one that deals with the bump in the night to
Mm-hmm.
go check the house, and just that I think it also speaks to sacrifice, of be the ones to sacrifice for those around you. And do you have any other thoughts you want to add to that, about what does it mean to act like men, for the church and for us today to be told to act like men?
Yeah, well, it's a unique word. I mean, like it's the only time this Greek word appears in the New Testament, and so it comes from it literally just act like a man. And so exactly what just be manly. I mean, it was used to the point of this word was, not to just puff out your chest, but to be courageous and to be.
Mm,
So you think about particularly what men were responsible for doing in the Roman Empire, and so you think about not just work, but also like who was going to war to protect,
yeah.
and so it wasn't. It's important to note that he's telling everybody to act like a man.
Mm-hmm.
He's not telling the men to act like men. He's telling the church to act like men.
Right. He's telling us to act like men. Yeah.
Right. And so I mean, I think that's significant. Lest we like resist this idea. It's a different theological point, but it's a similar question mark that people have when I've seen some translations when it says that we have adopted as sons. Some translations say we're adopted as children, because they want to be gender neutral, but in the sense of like both, of course, both men and women have been
Sure.
adopted, but the word sons is purposefully used not just to talk about maleness, but to talk about inheritance,
Right.
because it's adopting from that first century practice, right? Well, similarly here, it's not devaluing women, it's telling the whole church to be courageous, to go to war, right? And so in many ways, lists like this happen where you have four words that are very similar in meaning used together. And so they all inform the other. And the whole church the men are watchful, men stand firm, men are strong, right? And the whole church should act like that.
Love it. And yeah, there's a certain overlap between all of these things. The very next one says then to be strong.
Mm-hmm.
I just think, if as a Christian, you're gonna need to be strong. You need to dig in, and things are, like we were talking about earlier, not always gonna be easy. And just to understand that the Christian life is not an easy life.
Yeah.
Life with Christ is easy. His burden is easy. But life with the rest of us is not easy.
Yeah.
And there's going to be lots of hardships to have to endure. They're going to require strength that only He supplies.
Yeah. We have many adversaries.
That's exactly, and they're not always easy adversaries
Right.
to deal with. So, and then this last verse, or this next verse here in this section, let all that you do be done in love. You almost could just let the whole letter just be that.
Yeah.
It kind of sums it up quite well. Um, and this, I just did a funeral this last week, and funerals always hit me a lot different than I even like doing. I prefer doing funerals than weddings, personally, because funerals, everyone tends to have kind of a sobriety about life,
Mm.
realizing that there's a finite amount of time
Yeah.
that God gives us. And because not everyone gets married, but everybody dies unless Jesus comes before that. And so there's a certain thought that people go through of like, what are people going to say at my funeral?
Mm-hmm.
Or what am I doing with my life? And what type of mark am I leaving on the world? And there's those types of, your mortality gets thrown in your face, and you have a sensitivity and a humility that sometimes is really hard to find for some people. And this verse of of questioning, at least for me, is everything I'm doing being done in love, and
Hmm.
letting love being the filter in which you screen your whole life through. And if things are just like self-indulgent, or looking to have an axe to grind against somebody, or it's just some other unloving quality, to let that go. And
Yeah.
that's not going to build the kingdom. That's going to drag things down at best. And it's just a really awesome verse to live by
Yeah.
and die by.
Sure. And I think it's essential to see that verse 13 and 14 inform one another.
Exactly.
Jesus was the ultimate man, and he died on the cross for us. And
Hmm.
so the most manly thing you can do is love one another.
I was going to mention this about the act like men with like Ephesians 5, where talking about husbands and wives, and
Hmm.
how specifically to husbands, they're to love their wives as Christ loved the church, who gave himself for her and presented her blameless. And men and women are supposed to love each other and to have the same amount of love for each other, but there's a different role in that relationship, and that if there's sacrifice to be had in marriage, the man takes the lion's share of sacrifice.
Mm.
And that being a man, like you're saying, has a sacrificial design to it. And I think that's exactly what the church in Corinth was being instructed and needed to do, and which all Christians need to participate in, is a sacrifice for one another, which is, like I said, very manly.
Yeah. So this might be an oversimplification. I'd love to know what you think, but I just think in our culture, we hear the phrase all the time, toxic masculinity. Um, and while I think that has been used in a variety of ways, some good, some not, there is certainly unhealthy forms of ways manliness is understood in our culture. And so, according to these two verses combined together, I might say something like, you know, real like toxic masculinity is strength without love, and real toxic femininity is love without strength.
Mm,
Um, that those both go together. And not that there's not differences between men and women, of course, but my point is that real manliness, according to this, is loving one another. And love is not weak either. And so to be, um, for husbands to love their wives, like you said, is to sacrifice. And that takes that's not being a doormat. That's like absolute like every fiber of strength you have.
yeah, I will seek your ultimate good, not to fulfill all of your desires and pleasures. Like
Right.
it's to think of someone's ultimate good and provide for it. So now let's go ahead. Let's read 15 to 18, please.
Okay. Now I urge you, brothers, you know that the household of Stephanus were the first converts in Achaia, and that they have devoted themselves to the service of the saints. Be subject to such as these, and to every fellow worker and laborer. I rejoice at the coming of Stephanus and Fortunatus and Achaicus, because they have made up for your absence. For they have refreshed my spirit as well as yours. Give recognition to such people.
So going back to what we were talking about of workers of the Lord being subject to them. So here you have whole households
Mm-hmm.
that are devoted to the service of the saints. And Paul's tossing around some uncomfortable words like be subject to such
Mm-hmm.
as these. So what does it mean, and what does it look like to be subject to a family that's devoted to the service of the saints?
Well, firstly, it's important for us. I mean, this is sort of it's hard for us to get our minds around the idea of a household, um, because we live in a very individualistic culture, right? So, I know this person has this job, but when a individual had, say a blacksmith, um, back then, their whole household, the economy was under one roof, right? The household all participated in that work. And so, um, therefore, I mean, so just thinking about like, in under one roof, you would have not only a family living, but you also have like cattle and stuff. And so typically today, our home is a place of retreat, and the economy is outside of our home, right? And so you go home and you live with your family, and then you go do your job. But that's just a very different way of
Hmm.
thinking than here, where everyone contributed to the work, to the trade. You know, Peter was a fisherman because his father was a fisherman, and then you have that participation. And so, um, if the father of a home has committed the family work, so to speak, to the Lord, the whole family is contributing. I mean, it's kind of made sense for that to be. And so you have some people like Paul, who's Lone Ranger going solo, you know. You have Timothy, who's a young man who's doing, but sometimes you had families who were all in on the work of the Lord, and so you would participate in that.
And that's interesting because you have early in Corinthians the possibility of being married to an unbelieving spouse. But here you have these families, like you said, like are all in. This whole home group is dedicated towards the service of the saints, particularly. And then it's interesting the need to be subject to them because
Hmm.
I'm starting to see more and more that scripture doesn't tell us to do something we're going to do anyways. Like that if it's just total, it doesn't tell us to like breathe. Like it's just like you're just going to naturally do that anyways. Um, and I know there's some verses talking about life and breath and things like that. So
Hmm.
don't just settle down, anyone. Okay. Um, talking on the internet could be hazardous. But my point is that this whole family is being told, or is the church is being told to be subject to such as these, and that there's a certain amount of cooperation the church is to have with them and what they're doing, and that the service they're providing for the saints, whatever that service is, the church is supposed to whatever to some degree to participate in that and be subject to them. And I think of it similar to almost like a quarterback on a football team where there's this role on the team if they're going to call a play and they're going to pass the ball, throw the ball, and you participate in that play. And that doesn't make you a worse player on the team, but just accepting your role on the team. And so if you have these families, the term we use today, I think, is full time ministry.
Hmm.
And it's just like because here it says they've devoted themselves. I think everyone's devoted to God
Hmm.
and devoted to service. Here, this idea of being devoted to the service of the saints and that what they're looking to do, what they're participating in, that the church should have some deference to that we're going to support that, we're going to help that, we're not going to get in the way of that and partner with them in it. And I think that one of the most motivating things for me getting into ministry was when I had some older people believe in me. When I like, oh, you're gonna. I remember I was getting ready to go to Bible school, and one of the elders here, Dave Williams, I was taking my motorcycle from Alaska to Texas, and he also had done that journey a few times, but he believed in me and what we were doing, and so he gave. It sounds kind of silly now, but he gave me my first helmet. He's
Hmm.
like, here's one of my old helmets. I want you to take this
Nice.
with your journey and your trip. And it was just this kind of it was this understood support
Hmm.
in this. And so um I just think then just thinking about several things, this family being devoted to the service saints, it makes me want to have some reflection on my family and for all families to think about what is your family devoted to? What's the devotion of one's family?
Hmm.
And I love seeing this family time. Like we had James and Andrea on, or James on here with Albania a few weeks ago, and him talking about his family as the team
Right.
there. And so there's a family that's devoted to it. So once again, there's not this hierarchy of the
Hmm.
church, but there is this need for deference into certain situations. And so when you have families that are devoted in this way, the church is to be subject to it. And I think that that's a uncomfortable word, the idea of being subjected
Yeah.
to someone.
Yeah. So let's see if this idea connects or not. So the idea of to be subjected to them, it can also be translated to submit, same word, or to bring yourself under the influence of another. And I think so there, it's not just yes sir, yes ma'am, but it's a really, you know, putting yourself in the position as a student and learning from another. Um, so in Ephesians 5, you mentioned a minute ago the way husbands and wives relate to one another. I think it's fascinating because it begins in that relationship by saying, wives submit or be subject to, same word here, to your husbands. Um, in the Greek text, that word to submit is not there. It's actually picked up from the verse before when he says, submitting to one
One
another
another.
out of
Yeah.
reverence for Christ. Wives to your husbands is what it literally says. Wives to your husbands, as to the Lord. Husbands, love your wives, Christ loved the church. So the point is that there's a general reality of mutual submission within the church body. Everybody submits to everybody. That's humility at its finest. Um, but what that looks like specifically between relationships is going to vary. And so it's almost like out of the mutual submission that you see within a church body, you have um, the way it looks like in this case for Paul in Ephesians 5 between husbands and wives. And I think that's not the only specific submission that you see. And you see that's going to look differently in every relationship, you know. And so between older and younger, that's another thing. The way you honor people who are older than you, and the way you mentor those who are younger than you, things like that. But here, there's an outworking of that mutual submission is what does it look like when an individual or a family has committed everything to the Lord,
And I
bringing
think
yourself under their influence.
I think that that's becoming thankfully very present in a lot of people's minds of how marriages have certain expectations and roles within those dynamics
Mm-hmm.
of love and respect, of sacrifice and submission, these types of things. And marriages need to have a certain form and function to them. I love how that's really kind of resurfacing in our
Mm-hmm.
culture. And I hope then maybe the next level of that is as a family, what type of submission is there to be in a congregation, like and with church leaders, and have what we see here, these dynamics of different, because you're right, we're all supposed to have a general submission to one another, but then there's a functionality in the kingdom as certain roles that then garner also a unique kind of submission
Mm-hmm.
and on a practical level. And so that doesn't mean that they're more spiritual,
Yeah.
but there is a functionality in the kingdom that the general Christians, the body of believers are to operate with. And I think that's what we're seeing here, and I think that this is something that we see played out, and it works wonderfully when you have healthy leadership, you have missionaries going in and out, and we're trying to help them. We defer to them, like, okay, you guys know the locals. You say you need this, we're gonna help you give this,
Mm-hmm.
and that works. And I think this is encouraging because this is showing us why it works, is because it's actually a scriptural pattern to have deference to their realm of responsibility, that we don't armchair quarterback
Yeah.
other ministries, that we instead, okay, we're going to trust you, we're going to support you, in this, and not turn a blind eye to you, but we're going to partner with you, in this. And I just think that understanding those relationships are really going to help our congregations thrive.
Yeah. And so at the bottom of it, it says give recognition to such people. Like in my mind, I'm not just giving recognition to them because they've pushed all their chips in. I mean,
Yeah.
that's part of it, but I'm recognizing that the Lord is using them. And so really it's at the end of the day, this is all a submission to the Lord. And so I'm going to recognize these people and maybe buried within that, recognizing what God is doing through these individuals and families.
And if you're in full time ministry, you probably are aware of sometimes burnout is a real thing,
Mm-hmm.
and you work yourself to the bone. There's not a 9 to 5. Like, it's hard to clock out. The world is crazy. People are messy. It never ends. And so that's different, because I was trying to think, like, why is there a command to give them recognition?
Mm-hmm.
And well, it's because sometimes these people need to be recognized, and also the church sometimes needs to get prompted to give them recognition, because a lot of times you can get the old thing of 10% of the people doing 90% of the work, or
Mm-hmm.
you get these people that are just quiet servants suffering in silence for on and on and on, and for the body to recognize, okay, there's this work happening, calling the attention. A lot of times those workers don't want the spotlight on them,
Yeah.
but to put the spotlight on them, to then help them and pray for them, partner with them, is really, really important. That way it gives longevity to that service.
Yeah. If the only feedback you're offering to your leaders is criticism,
Ugh.
you've messed up. Yeah.
Correct.
There's a time and a place for that. But, there's this encouragement, man, goes such a long way.
It does. It goes the distance. So let's go ahead and finish out the book here, or the letter here. So
Okay.
finish this out.
The churches of Asia send you greetings. Aquila and Prisca, together with the church in their house, send you hearty greetings in the Lord. All the brothers send you greetings. Greet one another with a holy kiss. I, Paul, write this greeting with my own hand. If anyone has no love for the Lord, let him be accursed. Our Lord come. The grace of the Lord Jesus be with you. May my love be with you all in Christ Jesus. Amen.
Sometimes get like emotional whiplash from Paul's writings with some things, man. But
Greeting, holy kiss, and
curse him if he doesn't love the Lord.
Yeah.
So here we see the timeless example of nicknames, and like my literal name is Michael. Most people call me Mike.
Mm-hmm.
It's interesting. You have Prisca here, and it's just another rendition of Priscilla, like we see from with Apollos early, Priscilla and Aquila, the couple. But yeah, you caught on already this idea of hearty greetings from the Lord. And I think that's really, again, this is scripture, and this is the conclusion of the letter, but the letter is scripture.
Mm-hmm.
And you can see it here where there's a sincerity, there's a personalities behind this, in that what we read in the Bible is not just this template of truths of the cosmos and creation design, but we also see a certain kind of relationship we're supposed to imitate and possess amongst each other. And just thinking, when does a greeting go from a casual greeting to a hearty greeting? And that's being displayed here. And that's not stiff or formal. And it just made me, when I read that, I was like, I want to be a person that gives hearty greetings instead of just like a cold, hello again. Like,
Yeah.
but a hearty, I don't know if there's a bear hug or what that exactly translates to, but having the network and relationship with people in the kingdom to where you're excited to be connected to them, instead of like, again, that you shouldn't be an Eeyore of sorts with this. So be hearty people. Also, we see here is that this network of people in Corinth is part of something so much bigger than Corinth. This has been really focused on Corinth, this whole letter, but then it's zooming out and showing how this one congregation is really a part of something so much bigger, and that helps orient where I think they're supposed to go as a congregation, and kind of just looking up from all of the bickering and divisiveness and infidelity and all this other stuff that's been going on. It's like you're a part of all of this, greeting one another with this holy kiss. I've been thinking a lot about why a holy kiss, and something that came up in my preparation for this and studying on this is that you can't kiss everyone at once. A kiss, just like Judas betraying Jesus, it singles somebody out. Because, you and I are preaching all the time, how easy it is for us to stand up there and to be like, good morning, everyone. It's so good to see you today. You can do those blanket statements.
Yeah.
But to look at one individual and to say, hello, you, I accept you, I love you, I'm glad that you're here, you and I are both set apart by Christ. Then there's this practice of kissing, which I think is actually putting your lips on somebody is I don't think the point of this. The point is the essence of what's going on here, of like laser focus, where it's not this broad greeting and invitation to people. It's like a singling out of someone, of recognition and acceptance, and how really the church should never be a place of cold shoulders.
Sure.
And to make sure cold shoulders don't happen, you got to give holy kisses, which is that laser focus on an individual instead of this broad sweeping, I love this place. I'm so happy we're all here together. Like that, you can, with those generalities, you are not allowing yourself to have relationships.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So, I mean, a holy kiss was just like, that's how you greeted people. I mean, greetings, greetings, greetings. How do you do that? And there's a lot of cultures that are still that way. That's how you greet people. And so how do you greet someone in with warmth and individuality in our culture? I mean, that's how you translate that. But it's interesting. So I have an app open in front of me with the text that when you can click on a word, it brings up the Greek word, but it also shows you other forms of that used in the passage you're looking at. So I just happened to click on kiss and also highlighted love in verse 22. No one has love for the Lord, that they're connected because the Greek word for kiss is philema, and the word for no love for the Lord, phileo, and it's showing that connection. And I don't know what to make of that, but that sent my brain down a certain path, and where what I was thinking was a holy greeting and a holy kiss. What makes it holy is that it's rooted in your love for Jesus.
Exactly.
So I've seen a lot of people, even recently, take this. We're supposed to greet each other with a holy kiss, and they just start kissing people left and
Right.
right. That's not holy.
Correct.
It's prideful. It's not rooted in your love for the Lord. There's
If it's another box to check,
Yeah,
then that's
yeah.
just gross.
But there are people who do that out of their love for the Lord. So, but my point is that this the ability to greet someone as an individual in the church. Remember, the church there's no other place where these people are going to be together. Think about the congregation that you go to. What other social connection would bring those people together? I mean, you think about when we go into the auditorium on Sunday here at the Valley, the differences in age. You have men and women together. You have a bunch of children. You have different economic. You have people who are very wealthy, people who are not. You have people in this trade and that job or this education, lack of education, whatever. In normal societies, those people aren't together. People are together because they like the same football team, or they have the same career, or they have the same hobbies, or it's the similarities that bring them together. The similarity that brings people together is Jesus.
Exactly right. And this is how we come full circle into Paul demonstrating he has a people
Mm-hmm.
and he's participating in a vast network of people. And the way you join that network, the way you find a people is you greet people with a holy kiss.
Yeah.
That's how you get in.
Mm-hmm.
And that's how you see that you bring people in, or that you accept where you've been added to in Christ. And so as you attend, as you fellowship, as you see somebody in the grocery store, when you take time to laser in on somebody and say, hello, brother, sister, in whatever appropriate cultural way to then express fellowship with that person, and you both know that you're spending fellowship, because you might uh, communication is a difficult thing just in practice. So this is a holy kiss is a communication thing. So where both of you know we're in fellowship,
Mm-hmm.
and you practice that, it's not going to take long at all for you to realize, okay, I have a people, I have a network, I have a body that I belong to. And if you're not practicing a holy kiss, that's when you start becoming fringy, drifting, isolated. I don't know these people. None of them
Yeah.
care about me.
Yeah.
And so holy kissing and the practice of it is really, how you participate in this kingdom that is way bigger than just your local environment.
Yeah. I love the way he just says greetings over and over.
Yeah.
Like they bring you greetings, they bring you greetings, they bring you greetings, greet one another. And it's made me think in our culture, um, I think it's important for us who are disciples of Jesus to learn how to greet people twice, because the first one is going to be nothing. Like, hey brother, how you doing?
Good. How are you?
Yeah. Figure out a way to ask again. And maybe it's a probing question. How's the family? How's work going? Otherwise, you're going to talk about the weather. or you're going to get cliches. Every day is a holiday, or one step forward, two steps back, whatever the sort of these like
living the dream.
Living the dream. Yeah. And how are you really doing? Learning and having the courage to ask those questions, I think, is probably obeying this passage. And that's a holy greeting.
That's a good challenge and encouragement, making sure that we're people of holy greetings.
Yeah.
Well, thank you so much for participating in this episode and concluding the book of Corinthians. Excited to see where next week takes us. But be sure to like, comment, subscribe, share, ring the notification bell. Whatever. Maybe we need to get like a merch store and buy some merch, but we're not there yet.
All the things.
But we really do love you. Thank you for praying for us. We feel and see the effect of your prayers. Thanks for being part of this. We love you, and we'll see you next time.